Welcome, dear travelers of the soul, to a story that transcends time and distance. Today I bring you a narrative that teaches us that true love knows no borders, that courage can bloom in the most wounded hearts, and that sometimes the most desperate decisions lead us toward our most beautiful destiny. In this era where digital connections seem ephemeral, we will go back to 1882, when a letter could change an entire life, when a woman's worth was measured by her capacity for adaptation, and when the American West promised new beginnings for brave souls. From what corner of the world do you join us today? I would love to know from where you listen to this story of love and hope. And if this narrative touches your heart, as I hope it will, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave your like. Every gesture of support helps us continue sharing these stories that nourish the soul. The London mist slid between the cobblestone streets like sighs from a dying era, while in the distant lands of the American West, the wind painted promises on the golden fields of Colorado. The yellowed paper crackled between Catherine Rose Ashworth's gloved fingers, like the dry autumn leaves that refused to fall. The dim October light filtered through the fogged windows of the Ashworth mansion, drawing melancholic shadows over the empty spaces where mahogany furniture and portraits of illustrious ancestors once resided. Catherine closed her eyes and breathed deeply. The aroma that had once been of roses and beeswax had now turned to dampness and disappointment. Echoes of hurried footsteps resonated from the floor below. Her Aunt Margaret was directing the sale of the last valuable objects. "Catherine, dear," Margaret's voice cut through the silence like a razor wrapped in velvet. "Reverend Whitfield has come to visit you again." A shiver ran down Catherine's spine. Reverend Whitfield, with his 62 years, and his breath that reminded one of boiled cabbage, represented the only respectable way out of her fall from grace. His marriage proposal lay on the living room table like a death sentence disguised. As salvation, Catherine approached the window and observed the abandoned garden. The roses her mother had cultivated with such care now grew wild, their petals scattered on the ground like crystallized tears. At that moment her eyes fell upon the newspaper resting on the windowsill. The Liverpool Mercury. Her fingers slid through the pages until they stopped at a section she had never before contemplated: matrimonial correspondence, new opportunities in America. The words seemed to dance before her eyes, but one particular notice caught her attention with the force of lightning. "Widowed man of firm character and honest work, resident in Willow Creek, Colorado, seeks respectable lady of good principles willing to share his life in Western lands. Address Samuel Crawford, Crawford Ranch, Willow Creek, Colorado, United States." Catherine's heart accelerated like the fluttering of a trapped hummingbird. America, the West, a completely different life where no one would know her past, where she could be whoever she chose to be. "Catherine," Margaret's voice approached up the stairs. "The Reverend awaits your answer." Catherine folded the newspaper and tucked it between the folds of her skirt. For the first time in months, a genuine smile appeared on her lips. Maybe, just maybe, there existed another way out that didn't involve becoming the wife of a man who would double her age and suffocate her with his mediocrity. The pen trembled in Catherine's hand like a leaf in the wind. For 3 days she had drafted and discarded countless drafts, each word weighted as if it were made of lead. The decision to respond to the advertisement had germinated in her mind like a persistent seed fed by desperation and watered with hope. The room was immersed in the penumbra of the London evening. Catherine had lit a candle whose flame danced, casting shadows that seemed to whisper secrets. Finally, with a determination that surprised her, she began to write. "Dear Mr. Crawford, I am writing to you after reading your advertisement in the Liverpool Mercury. I am Catherine Rose Ashworth, 28 years old, daughter of a respectable London family. I have received excellent education in literature, music, and domestic arts. I seek, as you do, the opportunity for a new beginning in lands where the past does not determine the future." Catherine paused. She had conveniently omitted her financial situation, but had not lied completely. She enclosed a portrait from 5 years ago, when her eyes still shone with the innocence of one who had not known loss. Weeks later, when the response arrived, Catherine opened it with trembling hands. Samuel's handwriting was firm but kind. Dear Miss Ashworth, your letter has made a pleasant impression on me. I must warn you that life in Colorado is very different from what I imagine you know in London. Here the work is hard but honest. I have an 8-year-old daughter, Mary, who needs the guidance of a good woman. I enclose my photograph, although I must confess with humor that my hair has begun to take certain liberties with time. If you still wish to know more about this proposal, I will be awaiting your response. Respectfully, Samuel Crawford. Catherine. Studied the photograph under the lamplight. Samuel had kind eyes and a smile that seemed sincere, although evidently the photo was several years old. His hair, as he had mentioned with humor, showed signs of retreat at the temples. The correspondence continued for 2 months. With each letter, Catherine fell more in love with the idea of a different life. Samuel described golden sunsets over purple mountains, the aroma of earth after rain, and an intelligent daughter who asked if the new lady would know how to make English pastries. One December morning, Catherine received the letter that would change her destiny. Dear Catherine, if your decision is firm, I am sending money for passage. The next White Star Line ship departs from Liverpool on January 15th. I will await you at Willow Creek Station on February 5th. With hope in my heart, Samuel. Catherine observed through the window the snow that began to fall over London. The flakes danced like small angels announcing a new chapter. That night, while the wind howled between the mansion's chimneys that she would soon lose forever, Catherine knew there was no turning back. Would her heart survive the ocean that separated her from her destiny? The port of Liverpool seethed with activity under the grey dawn sky. Catherine remained on the deck of the RMS Britannic, watching as the English coast slowly faded until it became a blurry line between sea and clouds. Her belongings, reduced to 2 modest trunks, rested in a third-class cabin she would share with 3 other women: an Irish woman fleeing famine, a German woman searching for her brother, and an Italian woman who whispered prayers in her musical language. The first days of crossing were a torment. Catherine's stomach rebelled against the ship's constant swaying, and nights passed between nausea and nightmares where Samuel Crawford transformed into a sinister figure who rejected her at her desolate port. The other passengers comforted her with home remedies. The Irish woman offered her mint tea, the German woman gave her temple massages, and the Italian woman lulled her with songs that spoke of love and hope. On the 5th day, Catherine managed to keep a piece of black bread in her stomach. She ventured to the upper deck, where the salty wind disheveled her hair that she had kept so perfectly styled for years. For the first time in a long while, she felt free. An elderly woman with penetrating eyes approached her. It was Mrs. O'Malley, an Irish woman traveling to reunite with her son in New York. "Young lady," she said with a marked accent, "I see in your eyes the same expression I had 40 years ago. Are you going to meet a man you only know through letters?" Catherine nodded, blushing. "Don't be ashamed, dear. Mail-order marriages are more honest than many celebrated in elegant salons. At least both know what they're getting into." During the following days, Mrs. O'Malley became her confidant. She taught her to walk with the ship's sway, to distinguish the different greys of the marine sky, and above all to find courage in uncertainty. True love, she would say while watching the whales that followed the ship, doesn't need to know all the details before flourishing. Sometimes it's enough to plant the seed of trust and water it with hope. The nights in the cabin became less lonely. The 4 women shared stories, fears, and dreams. Catherine discovered she wasn't the only one betting her future on the unknown. Humanity, she understood, was made of small acts of faith. On the 14th day, when the cry of land echoed throughout the ship, Catherine headed to the deck with her heart racing. The silhouette of New York emerged from the morning mist like a materialized promise. The buildings rose toward the sky with an audacity that London had never known. At the port, chaos was absolute. Vendors shouted in languages Catherine didn't understand. Children ran between passengers' legs, and the aroma of exotic spices mixed with the smell of fish and coal. Mrs. O'Malley hugged her before departing toward her destiny. "Remember, dear Catherine, courage is not the absence of fear, but the determination to move forward despite it. That night in a modest New York hotel, Catherine wrote in her diary, "Tomorrow I will take the train west. I don't know what awaits me in Colorado, but for the first time in years I feel I'm walking toward my true home." Would Catherine find in the wild western lands the love that the letters had promised? The Willow Creek train station was little more than a wooden platform under Colorado's infinite sky. Catherine descended from the train with trembling legs after 3 days of travel, her elegant traveling dress now wrinkled and dusty. The mountain air was different, cleaner, colder, with an aroma of pines and damp earth that filled her lungs almost painfully. She scanned the small crowd of sun-weathered faces until her eyes met those of a tall man with a thick beard who held a sign with her name. Samuel Crawford. But he wasn't the Samuel from the photograph. This man had premature grey hair that silvered his temples, deep wrinkles around his eyes, and an expression of surprise that quickly transformed into something resembling disappointment. Catherine felt as if an invisible fist compressed her stomach. They approached each other with the stiffness of two actors who had forgotten their lines. Samuel removed his hat, revealing an incipient baldness that didn't appear in his portrait. "Miss Ashworth, I presume." His voice was deeper than she had imagined, with a hint of dryness that didn't bode well. "Mr. Crawford." Catherine tried to smile, but her lips trembled like autumn leaves. They studied each other for a moment that seemed eternal. Catherine saw in Samuel's eyes the same disappointment she knew was reflected in hers. Time had been cruel to both, or perhaps simply honest. "You are not the woman from the photograph," Samuel said bluntly with the brutal frankness of the West. "Nor are you the man from yours," Catherine responded, recovering some of her English dignity. A girl with large eyes and hair the color of ripe wheat appeared from behind Samuel. It must be Mary, although she looked wilder and less refined than Catherine had imagined. "Is this her papa?" asked Mary without any attempt at courtesy. "She smells funny." Catherine, mortified, and not knowing how to respond to such an observation, followed Samuel toward what she assumed would be a carriage. Instead, she found a cart, pulled by two mules that looked at her with what she swore was disdain. The road to the ranch passed in sepulchral silence, broken only by the creaking of wheels on dry earth, and Mary's occasional comments about various aspects of Catherine's appearance that she found curious. The Crawford Ranch spread before them like a small citadel against the immensity of the landscape. The main house was wooden solid but simple, surrounded by corrals and smaller buildings. Catherine felt a pang of nostalgia for the lost elegance of her London mansion. Upon descending from the cart, Catherine mistook the corral gate for the house entrance, heading toward a group of pigs that received her with enthusiastic grunts. Mary let out a crystalline laugh that echoed throughout the patio. "The house is over there," Samuel pointed with a sigh that contained years of fatigue. Several neighbors who had come to witness the arrival of the city bride nudged each other, clearly finding entertainment in the spectacle. Catherine felt her cheeks burn with shame. That night in the small guest room that Samuel had assigned her, while they found another solution, Catherine sat on the edge of the iron bed and observed through the window the stars that shone with an intensity unknown in London. The sound of voices came from the kitchen, Samuel and Mary discussing in whispers what to do with the situation. Catherine closed her eyes and felt a solitary tear slide down her cheek. She had crossed an ocean to find love and had landed in the country of mutual discomfort. Could something beautiful bloom from such a disastrous beginning? Morning arrived with a rooster's crow that sounded more like reproach than greeting to Catherine. She dressed carefully, choosing her most practical dress, a dove grey that now seemed terribly inadequate for ranch life. From her window, she could see Samuel feeding the animals with efficient movements that spoke of years of routine. She went down to the kitchen where Mary was eating oatmeal while balancing a rag doll on one leg. The girl looked at her with undisguised curiosity. "Papa says you're very different from Mama," Mary commented with the brutal honesty of children. "Mama knew how to milk cows." Catherine felt a pang in her chest. Rebecca Crawford was clearly a presence that still inhabited every corner of the house, her aprons hanging in the kitchen, her recipe books marked with annotations, her herb plants drying in bundles by the window. Samuel entered with boots full of mud and the aroma of stable clinging to his clothes. He stopped upon seeing Catherine as if he had forgotten for a moment that she was there. "Miss Ashworth?" He began removing his hat. "We need to talk." They sat on the wooden porch that surrounded the house. Silence stretched between them, like an abyss that neither knew how to cross. In the distance, mountains rose majestically indifferent to the small human dramas unfolding at their feet. "This is not what either of us expected," Samuel finally said, his voice charged with uncomfortable gentleness. "No," Catherine admitted, keeping her gaze fixed on her gloved hands. "It is not. But you have come very far, and Well, Mary needs a feminine influence." Samuel cleared his throat. "I propose an arrangement. You could work as a governess for Mary. I would pay you a modest salary and you would have lodging and meals. Meanwhile, we could both find other solutions." Catherine felt as if she had been offered crumbs when she expected a banquet, but she also recognized the kindness in the proposal. Samuel had no obligation to her, and yet he offered her a dignified way out. "I accept," she said with a serenity that surprised her. "But under one condition." Samuel raised an eyebrow. "I don't want to be seen as a burden or as an object of pity. I will work for my place here and contribute as I can to this household." Something changed in Samuel's expression, a spark of respect that hadn't been there before. "Mary can be challenging," he warned. "She hasn't had formal education and is accustomed to doing as she pleases." As if summoned by his words, Mary appeared with disheveled braids and mud up to her knees. "Mary," Catherine addressed the girl, with the soft but firm voice she had perfected through years of dealing with aristocratic London children. "Would you like to learn to serve tea like a true lady?" Mary looked at her with suspicion, but also with a curiosity she couldn't hide. "Like the princesses in fairy tales?" "Exactly like princesses." Samuel observed the exchange with something that could have been the beginning of a smile. Maybe Catherine thought there were seeds of hope in this arrangement after all. That afternoon, while Catherine attempted to teach Mary the fundamentals of proper posture, she realized she had begun to feel something she hadn't experienced in months: purpose. Could an agreement born of necessity transform into something deeper? The first weeks at the Crawford Ranch were for Catherine like learning a completely new language. Each morning brought with it small catastrophes and unexpected triumphs. Her hands, accustomed to the delicacy of embroidery and book pages, now showed small cuts and calluses from dealing with practical life. Mary had become her most demanding and entertaining student. The girl had a sharp intelligence that had developed wildly without the structure of formal education. Catherine discovered that teaching Mary required more creativity than all she had employed in London salons. "Irregular verbs are like wild horses," Catherine explained while they walked among the corrals. "You need to know each one individually, because they don't follow normal rules." Mary, who had been resisting grammar lessons, suddenly paid attention. "Like Tornado?" she asked, referring to the ranch's most temperamental horse. "Papa says he never does what we expect." "Exactly like Tornado." Samuel, who had been repairing a nearby fence, looked up, and Catherine caught something resembling admiration in his gaze before he quickly returned to his work. Catherine's attempts to introduce refinement into ranch life often resulted in comic disasters. Her first attempt to organize an afternoon tea was sabotaged when Beatrice, the boldest goat in the herd, burst onto the porch and devoured not only the cucumber sandwiches, but also the lace tablecloth Catherine had brought from England. Mary laughed until tears came, while Catherine chased Beatrice around the yard, shouting improprieties that definitely weren't in her etiquette manual. Samuel appeared running upon hearing the commotion and found Catherine covered in mud. Beatrice calmly chewing the tablecloth remains, and Mary applauding as if it were the most entertaining show in the world. "I suppose goats don't understand social schedules," Samuel commented, and Catherine detected a tremor of laughter in his voice. "Evidently they haven't received proper education," Catherine responded with wounded dignity, but couldn't prevent a smile from escaping. "Clearly they need etiquette lessons." It was the first time all three laughed together, and the sound spread across the ranch like music. The neighbors of Willow Creek, observed the gradual transformation with a mixture of amusement and curiosity. Mrs. Abigail Thompson, the official organizer of all the town's gossip, had begun making frequent visits under the pretext of bringing fresh eggs, but obviously to observe the progress of the Crawford situation up close. Jeremiah Blackwood, the town merchant, made no effort to hide his disdain for Catherine. He had catalogued her as a presumptuous city lady and didn't miss opportunities to make biting comments about her adaptation. "I bet she won't last until the first winter," he muttered to whoever would listen. "These city women are like greenhouse flowers. They wither at the first breath of real wind." But Catherine was determined to prove him wrong. She began rising before dawn to help with morning chores. Her first attempts to milk Bessie, the gentlest cow in the herd, resulted in more milk on the ground than in the bucket. But gradually, she developed the necessary rhythm. One afternoon, while Catherine taught Mary to sew a skill the girl had fiercely resisted, Samuel stopped at the kitchen door observing them. The golden light of sunset illuminated the scene, Catherine leaning over Mary's embroidery, gently correcting her stitches, while the girl listened with a concentration he had rarely seen in her. "Can I ask you something?" Mary said suddenly without looking up from her sewing. "Of course." "Do you miss your home in England?" Catherine stopped the needle suspended in air. It was a question she had been avoiding even in her own thoughts. "I miss certain things," she finally admitted, "but I'm beginning to think that home isn't necessarily the place where you were born, but where you choose to stay and grow." Samuel, who had been listening from the doorway, felt something move in his chest, something that had been sleeping since Rebecca's death. Was Catherine unknowingly sowing the seeds of a new home? The month of May arrived with an explosion of life that transformed the Colorado landscape into a tapestry of impossible greens. The meadows filled with wildflowers that Mary and Catherine collected to make small arrangements that decorated the kitchen table. It was during these morning walks that Catherine had begun to understand why Samuel had chosen this place. The beauty was so vast and natural that it made all artificiality seem unnecessary. The garden Catherine had planted behind the house was beginning to show promising signs. Small green shoots timidly peeked through the dark earth lettuce peas, aromatic herbs she had managed to obtain through seeds sent from Denver. It was her small piece of order in the apparently chaotic world of the ranch. That particular morning, Catherine was teaching Mary about the properties of different medicinal herbs, knowledge she had acquired from her grandmother, when a furious mooing broke the morning tranquility. Gertrude, the largest and most temperamental cow belonging to neighbor Ezra Collins, had broken the fence separating the properties and was now happily trampling Catherine's garden. The beast of almost 500 kilos seemed to find particular pleasure in destroying the ordered rows of vegetables, her hooves crushing weeks of careful work. "Oh, by all the saints!" exclaimed Catherine, jumping up and running toward the garden with her skirts fluttering. Mary followed her, shouting warnings that Catherine could barely hear above the rush of blood in her ears. Months of accumulated frustration channeled toward that destructive cow. Without thinking of consequences, Catherine grabbed a broom from the porch and began waving it at Gertrude. "Out, horrible beast! Get out of my garden immediately!" Gertrude, apparently surprised by this small figure waving a stick, stopped her destructive antics and looked at Catherine with what seemed to be bovine curiosity. For a moment, both studied each other in a battle of wills. Samuel appeared running from the stables, alerted by the screams. He stopped short upon seeing the scene, Catherine, with hair escaping from her usual bun cheeks, flushed with indignation, confronting a cow that enormously surpassed her in size and weight. "Catherine, don't move," Samuel shouted. "Gertrude can be unpredictable when she feels cornered." But Catherine was beyond reason. Weeks of trying to prove her worth, of adapting to a life she hadn't chosen, of maintaining dignity, while everything crumbled around her, culminated in this moment of rebellion against an invading cow. "I will not move. This is my garden, and this creature has no right to destroy my work." Gertrude, perhaps sensitive to the tone of absolute authority in Catherine's voice, or maybe simply bored with the game, began to walk away calmly toward the broken fence, but not before depositing one last gift right in the center of the garden remains. Samuel and Catherine stood there, breathing heavily, looking at the devastation. The peas were crushed, The lettuce destroyed the aromatic herbs scattered like green confetti throughout the terrain. And then something unexpected happened. Samuel began to laugh. It started as a silent laugh that shook his shoulders, then grew until it became a guffaw that echoed throughout the yard. Mary joined in her crystalline laughter, mixing with her father's. Catherine looked at them with indignation at first, but there was something about the absurdity of the situation. She, with a broom, threatening a cow in a destroyed garden covered in dirt and with leaves in her hair that finally broke her composure. She began with a smile, then a muffled laugh until she was laughing so hard that tears rolled down her cheeks. "You should have seen your face," Samuel managed to say between laughs. "I thought you were going to challenge Gertrude to a duel." "I would have won," Catherine responded, wiping away tears. "I have fencing training." The image of Catherine in fencing position facing a cow made them laugh even harder. They worked together all afternoon to repair the fence and clean the garden. Their hands brushed when they reached for the same stone, and for the first time neither pulled away immediately. Catherine felt calluses on Samuel's palms, evidence of years of honest work, while he noticed the softness that persisted in hers, despite weeks of labor. That night, while they dined on the stew Catherine had learned to prepare with herbs rescued from the disaster, Samuel looked at her across the table. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" asked Catherine, genuinely confused. "Gertrude destroyed all my work. For staying, for fighting, for making Mary laugh that way again." Catherine felt something warm expand in her chest, something that had no name but felt similar to hope. Could a destructive cow have been the catalyst their hearts needed? After the incident with Gertrude, something had changed in the dynamics of the Crawford ranch. Catherine noticed that Samuel sought her with his gaze during meals, that their conversations extended beyond merely practical topics, and that he had begun to smile more frequently. But along with these changes came something unexpected. Samuel had started avoiding her. When Catherine entered a room, he found excuses to leave. If she approached during ranch tasks, he moved away to another activity. It was as if he had drawn an invisible line he didn't dare cross, and each day that line seemed to become wider. Catherine felt confused and hurt. She had begun to feel something for this silent and hard-working man, something that went beyond gratitude or comfort. She had begun to imagine a future here in this place that had become more home than any mansion in London. But now Samuel treated her as if she were a dangerous stranger. Mary, with the brutal perceptiveness of children, observed this uncomfortable dance between the adults with growing frustration. "Papa is acting weird," she confided to Catherine one afternoon while they practiced calligraphy. "Before you came, he was sad all the time. After Gertrude, he was different, but now he's confused." Catherine didn't know how to respond. She was also confused. The breaking point came one full moon night when Catherine went out to the porch, unable to sleep. The night air was fresh and full of sage and pine aromas. She found Samuel there, sitting on the steps, looking toward the mountains, silvered by moonlight. She sat at a prudent distance, but this time he didn't move when she approached. "I can't sleep," Catherine admitted quietly. "Neither can I," Samuel responded, without taking his gaze from the horizon. They sat in silence for a long time, listening to the nocturnal chorus of crickets and the occasional distant mooing of cattle. Finally, Catherine found the courage to speak. "Have I done something to bother you, Samuel?" He looked at her then, and in his eyes Catherine saw a whirlwind of emotions she couldn't decipher. "No," he finally said. "The problem isn't you, Catherine, it's me." "I don't understand." Samuel ran a hand through his silver hair. "When Rebecca died, I thought she had taken with her the part of my heart capable of loving a woman. I focused on Mary, on the ranch, on surviving each day. It was safer that way." Catherine felt her breathing accelerate. "And then you came," Samuel continued. "You weren't what I expected. You weren't like Rebecca, but that didn't mean you were less. It meant you were you, Catherine Rose Ashworth, with your stubbornness and your grace, your determination to make Gertrude behave like a lady." Despite the seriousness of the moment, Catherine couldn't help but smile at the reference to the cow. "I've begun to feel something for you," Samuel admitted, his voice barely a whisper, something that scares me because it means my heart didn't die with Rebecca after all, but it also feels like a betrayal of her memory." Catherine felt tears pricking her eyes. She slowly extended her hand until she touched his. "Samuel loving again isn't a betrayal. It's a testament that Rebecca taught you to love so deeply that your heart knew how to do it again." He squeezed her hand, and Catherine felt years of loneliness and pain in that simple gesture. "I'm afraid," Samuel admitted. "Afraid of losing. You like I lost her. Afraid I'm not enough for you. You're an educated lady, and I'm just a rancher who can barely read." Catherine turned to face him completely. "Samuel Crawford, you are the most honorable man I have known. You've given me a home when I was a stranger, work when I needed it, and you've treated your daughter with a tenderness that speaks of the goodness of your heart. If that isn't enough, then nothing ever will be." They looked into each other's eyes, under the moonlight, and Catherine saw the exact moment when Samuel made his decision. Slowly, as if he feared she would disappear, he raised his free hand and touched her cheek. "Catherine," he whispered, could you consider staying? Not as a governess, as my wife." Catherine's heart beat so loudly she was sure he could hear it. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Samuel. Yes." When he kissed her softly at first, and then with a passion he had been repressing for weeks, Catherine knew she had found her true home. Not in a place, but in the arms of this good man, who had learned to love again. But could something so perfect last in a world full of uncertainties? Summer had woven its golden magic over the Crawford Ranch. Catherine had flourished under the Colorado sun like a flower that had finally found the right soil. Her engagement to Samuel had brought a quiet joy to the house. Mary had begun calling her Mama Catherine naturally, and the neighbors had started referring to her as the Mrs. Crawford-to-be. Catherine had established a routine that gave her deep satisfaction. Mornings she dedicated to Mary's education, afternoons to ranch tasks she had gradually mastered, and evenings to slow conversations with Samuel on the porch, planning their future. Together. They had set the wedding date for September after the harvest. Mrs. Thompson had insisted on organizing a celebration at the town church, and even Jeremiah Blackwood had begun treating her with rudimentary courtesy, though Catherine suspected it was more from fear of facing Samuel's wrath than from any genuine change in his attitude. It was on a perfect July morning when the Willow Creek postman delivered a letter that would change everything. Catherine immediately recognized the expensive paper and elegant seal correspondence from England, more specifically from the law office of Sir Edward Pemberton, her paternal uncle. With trembling hands, she opened the letter in the privacy of her room. "Dear Catherine, word of your whereabouts has reached me through investigations I have had to conduct following your aunt, Margaret's death 2 months ago. I deeply regret not having been aware of your desperate situation after your father's death. As your closest relative and your godfather, it is my duty to offer you what I should have offered long ago, a respectable home at Pemberton Hall, an annual allowance that will allow you to live with the dignity that corresponds to your family name, and my protection under the Pemberton surname. I have included sufficient funds for your immediate return to England. It is not appropriate for a lady of your education and lineage to remain in such reduced circumstances, in such primitive territories. I await your prompt response and your return. With familial affection, Sir Edward Pemberton." Catherine sat heavily on the bed's edge, the letter trembling in her hands. Everything she had desperately desired barely 6 months ago was now being offered to her on a silver platter: respectability, financial security, return to the society she had known all her life. But the life she had built here, the love she had found with Samuel, the relationship she had developed with Mary, could she simply abandon all that to return to a world that, although familiar, no longer attracted her? She hid the letter in her trunk and tried to continue with her normal day. But Samuel noticed her concern immediately. "What's wrong?" he asked, that night during dinner. "You've been quiet all afternoon." Catherine looked at Mary, who was eating concentrated on her stew, and then at Samuel. "I received a letter from England," she finally admitted. Something changed in Samuel's expression, a stiffness that Catherine recognized as preparation for pain. "Bad news?" "Not exactly." Catherine hesitated. "My uncle offers me to return. A respectable position, financial security." The silence that followed was deafening. Mary looked up, perceiving the tension in the air. "What does that mean?" the girl asked. "It means," Samuel said, his voice carefully controlled, "that Catherine has the opportunity to return to the life she knew before coming here." Mary dropped her spoon. "But what about the wedding? What about us?" Catherine felt as if her heart were breaking in two. She looked at these two people who had become her world, and then thought about the security and respectability her uncle offered her. "I don't know," she whispered. "I need time to think." That night, Samuel didn't come out to the porch. Catherine found him in the stable brushing thunder with mechanical movements that spoke of an agitated mind. "Samuel, we need to talk about this." "There's nothing to talk about," he said without looking at her. "Your uncle is right. This is no place for a lady like you. I always knew it." "That's not true, isn't it?" Samuel finally turned toward her. "Catherine, I'm asking you to give up a life of comfort, respectability, security for what a life? Of hard work on a lost ranch in Colorado. For love," Catherine said simply. "For a family, for a home." Samuel looked at her for a long moment, and Catherine saw the battle being fought in his eyes, love against sacrifice, desire against what he believed was best for her. "I love you too much to ask you to stay," he finally said. "If you truly love me, accept your uncle's offer. You deserve something better than this." Catherine felt as if he had slapped her. Without saying another word, she turned and returned to the house, leaving Samuel alone with the horses and the weight of his decision. Could true love survive the sacrifice each believed they had to make for the other? The following days passed in a tension that could be cut with a knife. Catherine had written and rewritten her response to her uncle half a dozen times, while Samuel avoided all conversation that went beyond the ranch's basic needs. Mary, with children's acute intuition for detecting impending misfortune, had become silent and sullen. Catherine had finally decided to accept her uncle's offer. The logic was implacable. Samuel was right about the advantages of returning to England, and if he loved her enough to let her go, maybe what she felt wasn't true love, but gratitude, confused with something deeper. She had packed her belongings with an increasingly heavy heart. Each folded dress, each wrapped book, each stored personal object seemed to close a chapter she had come to love deeply. The train to Denver would leave the next day, and from there she would take the stagecoach to Colorado Springs to connect with the Transcontinental Railroad. The morning of her departure dawned gray and windy, as if the sky itself sympathized with the general mood. Samuel had insisted on loading Catherine's trunks onto the cart himself, remaining courteous but distant. Mary hadn't appeared for breakfast. "Where is Mary?" Catherine asked, worried. "I suppose she's still upset," Samuel replied without looking at her. "She'll get over it." But when it came time to depart for the station, Mary still hadn't appeared. Samuel called her from the yard, then went to look for her in her room, then in the stable, in the garden, in all her favorite places. "She's nowhere to be found," he announced, now visibly worried. "Catherine, you have to leave or you'll miss the train." "I'm not leaving without saying goodbye to Mary," Catherine declared firmly. It was Mrs. Thompson who came running from town with news of the little fugitive. "I saw her running toward the old bridge over Mill Creek," she shouted from her horse. She was carrying a suitcase. The old bridge was a wooden structure that had seen better days, suspended over a small ravine where Mill Creek serpentined toward the main river. It was the place where Mary used to go when she needed to be alone, to think. Samuel and Catherine ran there, followed by half the town that had detected drama in the air. They found Mary sitting in the center of the bridge with Catherine's suitcase firmly grasped in her arms. "Mary," Samuel shouted, "get down from there immediately." "No," Mary responded with a determined voice. "I won't get down until Catherine promises she'll stay." Catherine slowly approached the bridge. The structure creaked ominously under her feet, but she focused on Mary's tearful but determined eyes. "Mary, sweetheart, you can't solve this way." "Yes, I can." Mary squeezed the suitcase tighter. "If there's no suitcase, you can't leave." "Mary." Samuel's voice had softened. This is between adults. Catherine has to make her own decision. But she's my mama, Catherine, Mary shouted, tears rolling down her cheeks. And you love her. I see it in how you look at her, and she loves you too. Why are adults so stupid? The silence that followed was broken only by the murmur of water running under the bridge and the murmur of spectators gathered at both ends. Catherine looked at Samuel, and in his eyes she saw all the truth he had been hiding behind his noble sacrifice. Mary is right, Catherine said, her voice charged with emotion. Adults are stupid. I love your papa, Mary. I love him with all my heart, and I think he loves me too, but he's too scared to admit it. Samuel took a step toward the bridge. Catherine. No, she interrupted him. This time it's my turn to speak. Samuel Crawford, you are the most honorable, brave, and good man I have known. You've given me more true love in these months than everything I had known in 28 years of respectable life. If you think I'm going to trade that for the approval of an uncle who didn't bother to help me when I really needed it, you're very wrong. But your uncle, the security, your social position. To hell with my social position, Catherine exclaimed, causing several spectators to gasp at such language from a lady. My position is here with you and with Mary, building something real and true. Samuel looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. Catherine, I love you so much it scares me. I love you so much I don't sleep at night imagining losing you. I love you so much I was willing to let you go because I thought it was best for you. Then stop thinking for me and tell me what you feel in your heart. Samuel walked to the center of the bridge, took Catherine's hands in his, and ignoring the assembled audience, completely looked directly into her eyes. My heart says I love you, Catherine Rose Ashworth. I love you and I want you to stay and marry me, and for us to be a real family. Catherine felt as if her heart would explode with happiness. Then yes, she whispered. Yes to everything. Mary released the suitcase, which fell into the creek with a satisfying splash, and launched herself to hug both adults. From the creek shores rose a chorus of applause and cheers. Mrs. Thompson was drying her eyes with her apron, and even some of the town's toughest men were discreetly wiping their cheeks. Does this mean I can keep calling you Mama Catherine? Mary asked. Forever, Catherine promised, kissing the girl's crown. Samuel took Catherine's face in his hands and kissed her right there in the center of the old bridge with half of Willow Creek as witness. But do fairy tales really have happy endings in real life? The small wooden chapel of Willow Creek had never harbored so much expectation. During the 2 weeks following the bridge incident, as it had come to be known in town, the entire community had thrown itself into preparations for Samuel and Catherine's wedding. Mrs. Thompson had appointed a committee of women who had taken charge of everything from the wildflowers that would adorn the chapel to the banquet that would be served in the community hall. Catherine had protested that so much fuss wasn't necessary, but had learned that when Mrs. Thompson decided something, it was easier to go with the flow. The morning of September 15th dawned golden and perfect, with the type of light that made the mountains seem painted with watercolors. Catherine dressed in Mrs. Thompson's room, who had insisted it wasn't appropriate for the bride to prepare in the same house as the groom on the wedding day. Her dress was the same white muslin she had brought from England, but Mrs. Thompson and the other women had altered it with handmade lace and small pearls that shone like dewdrops. Mary had insisted on weaving wildflowers into Catherine's hair, creating a crown that was half English elegance, half Western simplicity. You're beautiful, Mary sighed, stepping back to admire her work. Papa is going to cry when he sees you. Men don't cry at weddings, Mrs. Thompson corrected automatically, though her own voice sounded emotional. My papa is going to cry, Mary insisted, with the absolute certainty of one who knows her father well. At the chapel, Samuel waited at the altar with nervousness he hadn't felt since his first days as a rancher. He had put on his best suit, the Eco, only one he owned actually, and Ezra Collins, who was acting as his best man, kept telling him to calm down. Stop moving or you're going to wear down the floor planks, Ezra murmured. The woman already said yes twice, now you just have to say the words. Reverend Miller, a gentle man who had arrived in Willow Creek barely a year before, smiled while organizing his notes. He had had the opportunity to get to know the couple well during weeks of marriage preparation and was genuinely pleased to unite two people who clearly loved each other deeply. But not everyone in the chapel radiated happiness. Jeremiah Blackwood had sat in the last row, his sour expression suggesting he had come more to look for faults than to celebrate. Throughout the courtship, he had muttered comments about city, ladies and marriages doomed to failure. The chapel doors opened, and Mary entered first, scattering wild rose petals down the aisle with the seriousness of one fulfilling an important mission. Mrs. Thompson followed, who had accepted to give Catherine away in the absence of family, and then Catherine appeared in the doorway. Samuel felt as if the air had been sucked from his lungs. The morning light created a halo around her figure, and for a moment he wondered how he had been so lucky that this extraordinary woman had chosen to stay with him, instead of returning to the elegance of her previous life. Catherine walked down the aisle with the grace she had learned in London salons, but with a smile that was purely hers. Her eyes never left Samuel's face, and in them he saw confirmation of everything they had built together. When she reached the altar, Mrs. Thompson placed Catherine's hand in Samuel's with a solemnity that moved even the toughest attendees. "Take good care of her, Samuel Crawford," she murmured loudly enough for everyone to hear. "She's a treasure." "I know," Samuel replied, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I will." Reverend Miller began the ceremony with words about love, commitment, and building a life together, but he was interrupted by a voice from the back of the chapel. "This is ridiculous," exclaimed Jeremiah Blackwood, standing up. "We all know this. Marriage won't last. She's a city lady who'll get tired of playing farmer as soon as the first hard winter comes." A murmur of indignation ran through the chapel. Ezra Collins half rose, clearly ready to escort the disruptor to the exit, but Catherine raised a hand. "Mr. Blackwood," she said with a clear and authoritative voice, "you're right about one thing. I am a city lady, or at least I was. But what you don't understand is that a true lady is recognized not by where she was born but by how she chooses to live. And I choose to live here with honor, work, and love." Samuel felt a wave of pride so intense he thought his chest might explode. "Besides," Catherine continued with a smile that had a steel edge, "I've survived Gertrude. After that, any winter will be easy." The chapel erupted in laughter and applause. Jeremiah Blackwood, clearly defeated and humiliated, muttered something about people who don't know how to appreciate good advice, and left the chapel to everyone's great relief. Reverend Miller, smiling broadly, resumed the ceremony. "Samuel Crawford, do you take Catherine Rose Ashworth as your lawful wife to love and respect her in sickness and in health, in wealth and in poverty all the days of your life?" "I do," Samuel said, his voice clear and firm. "I accept her along with the dust, the wind, and the cows if it means having her." Laughter filled the chapel again. "Catherine Rose Ashworth, do you take Samuel Crawford as your lawful husband to love and respect him in sickness and in health, in wealth, and in poverty, all the days of your life?" Catherine looked into Samuel's eyes and saw her entire future there. "I do," she said with a radiant smile. "I accept the dust and the man." When Reverend Miller declared them husband and wife, Samuel kissed Catherine with a tenderness that made all the women present sigh. Mary, who had been holding back tears throughout the ceremony, finally let go and cried with happiness. "I told you Papa was going to cry," she whispered to Mrs. Thompson, pointing to Samuel, whose cheeks indeed showed traces of tears. As the couple left the chapel under a rain of petals and blessings, Catherine felt she had finally found her place in the world. It wasn't the place she had imagined, nor the life she had planned, but it was perfectly hers. But how would that perfection look tested by the passage of time? 5 years later, September 1887. The Crawford Ranch had flourished like a well-tended garden under the golden light of Colorado's autumn. Catherine paused on the porch, holding her son Thomas against her chest, and observed the transformation that time and love had wrought on her home. The garden, once destroyed by the memorable Gertrude, now spread prosperously behind the main house. Ordered rows of pumpkins and ripe corn waved gently in the breeze, while aromatic herbs perfumed the air with promises of preserves and medicines for the approaching winter. The house itself had grown. Samuel had added a gallery that surrounded the entire building, where morning glory vines climbed, creating natural curtains of purple flowers. Curtains embroidered by Catherine adorned the windows, and in the front garden rose bushes brought with seeds from England mixed harmoniously with native wildflowers. Mary, now 13, had developed the particular grace of one who grows between two worlds. She retained the iron determination she had demonstrated on the bridge 5 years ago, but now combined it with an education that had put her in correspondence with several Eastern universities. Catherine felt proud when she heard Mary converse in French with the town's new teacher, or when she saw her explaining trigonometry to younger children at Sunday school. Thomas "Tommy" Crawford, barely a year old, had inherited his father's kind eyes and his mother's quiet determination. He currently dozed against Catherine's chest, his small fists closed, as if determined to hold on to this perfect moment. Samuel appeared from the stables, wiping his hands on a towel. At 37, he had acquired the quiet dignity of a man who had found his place in the world. The silver hair at his temples no longer embarrassed him. Catherine had once confessed it gave him a distinguished air that made her feel proud when they walked together through town. "How is our little farmer?" Samuel asked, approaching to kiss his son's forehead and then his wife's lips. "Sleeping like an angel," Catherine replied. "Mary is in the garden, picking the last tomatoes for preserves. And you're here daydreaming," Samuel observed with a smile. "What are you thinking about?" Catherine leaned against him, feeling the familiar solidity of his presence. "About how everything changes. Do you remember our first meeting at the station?" Samuel laughed with the deep laugh Catherine had come to love more than any symphony. "I remember you confusing the corral with the house entrance, and you looked so disappointed I thought you'd send me back on the next train." "I was disappointed," Samuel admitted, "but not with you. I was disappointed with myself for believing I could replace Rebecca with a photograph and some letters." Catherine turned in his arms to look directly at him. "And what do you think now?" "Now I think it was the best disappointment of my life, because it taught me that love isn't finding someone to fill an empty space, but finding someone with whom to create a completely new space." From the garden came Mary's voice, calling them to come see the biggest tomato in Colorado history. They approached, laughing, Tommy waking to gurgle with pleasure at the sound of their voices. Life in Willow Creek had followed its natural course during these 5 years. Mrs. Thompson had established a kind of benevolent monarchy over the town's social affairs, and never missed an opportunity to remind anyone who would listen that she had been the first to predict that those two were made for each other. Jeremiah Blackwood had left town under mysterious circumstances 2 years ago. After it was discovered he had been adulterating several ranchers' accounts. His store had been bought by a German family that treated Catherine with the respectful deference deserved by the wife of one of the region's most prosperous ranchers. Ezra Collins had proven to be the most loyal neighbor in the world, and his cattle had finally learned to respect fences. Gertrude had died of old age the previous year, but not before producing abundant offspring that continued the family legacy of curiosity toward everything growing in others' gardens. That night, after putting Tommy to bed and making sure Mary completed her studies, Catherine and Samuel sat in their favorite spot on the porch. The tradition of nightly conversations had endured, through all the changes adapting to include the topics that accompany a growing family educational plans for Mary Ranch. Improvements, dreams about Tommy's future. Samuel took something from his pocket, a yellowed and wrinkled photograph. "I found this today cleaning the attic," he said, showing it to Catherine. It was the photograph she had sent with her first letter 5 years ago. The young woman in the image looked at her with eyes that hadn't yet known hard work motherhood, or the kind of love that changes the very structure of the soul. "My God!" exclaimed Catherine. "Was I really so polished?" "You were beautiful," Samuel said. "But this photograph didn't capture half of who you really are." Catherine took the photograph and studied it with the perspective that years provide. This woman didn't know how to milk a cow or make preserves, or that you could be completely happy in a house without servants. This woman didn't know she was going to fall in love with a stubborn farmer, Samuel added, nor that she was going to find a daughter in a girl who steals suitcases, Catherine continued, nor that she was going to bring the most beautiful baby in Colorado into the world, Samuel concluded. Catherine cuddled against him, the photograph still in her hands. "You know what's most extraordinary? When I answered your advertisement, I thought I was escaping from my life. It turns out I was running toward it." Samuel kissed her crown, breathing the aroma of her hair that now smelled more of prairie wind and garden herbs than London perfumes. "True love can't be captured in a photograph," he murmured. "It lives in hands that seek each other in darkness, in laughter shared over simple dinners, in the silent promise to be there when the storm comes." From inside the house came Tommy's soft crying. Catherine rose to attend to him but stopped to look once more at the ranch spreading under moonlight. Everything was exactly as it should be. Not perfect, the fences needed repair, the well pump leaked, and Mary had announced that morning her intention to study medicine, which would require serious conversations about her educational future, but it was deeply, completely right. "Come," she said to Samuel, extending her hand. "Our son needs us." As they walked together toward the house, Catherine thought about all the cards of destiny that had to be written to bring them to this moment, the desperation that had led her. To answer an advertisement, the courage required to cross an ocean, the love that had flourished in the least expected terrain. The future stretched before them like the golden fields surrounding the ranch, vast, full of possibilities, and perfectly theirs. And isn't this, after all, what a true happy ending means? The same day at night, the full moon rose over the mountains like a giant pearl set in black velvet, bathing the Crawford Ranch in silver light that transformed the familiar into something magical. Catherine had managed to put Tommy to sleep after his nighttime feeding and now returned to the porch where Samuel waited for her with 2 cups of mint tea from her own garden. She settled beside him on the swing he had built for her. In the 2nd year of marriage, when her pregnancy had made her melancholy in the afternoons, the swing had become their sanctuary, the place where they made important decisions, where they shared each day's achievements, where they simply existed together in the tranquility of mature love. "What do you think about when you look at me like?" "So that," Catherine asked, noticing the particular intensity in Samuel's eyes. "I think about the miracle you are," he replied, without a hint of shame for the sentimentality. "I think about how a letter changed not just my life, but the way I see the entire world." Catherine smiled, cuddling closer to him. "I think about how different we are from those people who met at the train station 5 years ago." Different. How Catherine reflected, listening to the sounds of the night, the soft hooting of an owl, the murmur of wind through the aspens, the occasional distant mooing of cattle. That Catherine was afraid of everything, of poverty, of loneliness, of others' judgment, of not being enough. This Catherine has learned that being enough isn't something others decide for you. "And what else have you learned?" Samuel asked gently, kissing her temple. "I've learned that home isn't a place, but a feeling. That true elegance is in kindness, not in expensive clothes. That you can love someone more deeply each day without it running out, as if love were a well that fills as you draw more water from it." Samuel remained silent for a moment, absorbing her words. "I've learned it's possible to love 2 women at the same time without betraying either," he finally said. "I'll love Rebecca until the day I die for what she taught me about being a husband and father. But I love you for who you've helped me become, someone who can honor the past without living as its prisoner." Catherine felt tears of gratitude pricking her eyes. It had taken time, but she finally understood she wasn't Samuel's second wife, but the first wife of who he had become after Rebecca. "You know what my greatest fear is," Catherine confessed. "Tell me." "That Mary will grow up and leave to study in the East as she wants to do. That Tommy will grow up and decide ranch life isn't for him. That one day I'll wake up and all this will have been just a very beautiful dream." Samuel took her hands in his, noticing the fine lines that had appeared from work and time hands that now knew how to knead bread, heal wounds, and create beauty from nothing. "Catherine, do you know the difference between a dream and real life?" "What?" "Dreams are perfect. Real life has cows that destroy gardens, children who steal suitcases, and malicious merchants who try to ruin your wedding day. But real life also has love that grows in the middle of all those disasters, that becomes stronger by surviving them." Catherine laughed softly. "Then we're definitely living real life. The most real there is." They swayed gently on the swing, each lost in their own thoughts but connected by shared tranquility. From Mary's room came the soft sound of turning pages. The girl was probably reading secretly under the blankets, a habit Catherine pretended not to notice. "Samuel," Catherine said after a while, "do you ever regret placing that advertisement in the newspaper?" "Never. Do you regret answering it?" "Never. Although I must admit I'm glad you were gentleman enough not to mention to anyone that in my first letter I slightly exaggerated my domestic competence." Samuel let out a guffaw that echoed throughout the yard. "Slightly exaggerated, Catherine. You said you were expert in culinary arts. Your first dinner almost poisoned the whole family." "It was a perfectly respectable stew," Catherine protested with feigned dignity. "I just forgot to mention that in England our cook used to prepare the ingredients." "My dear, you tried to cook a whole chicken without cleaning it, with feathers." Catherine blushed, remembering that particular disaster. Mary was very gentle in pointing out my error. Mary screamed, "Mama Catherine, the chicken is crying," and ran out of the yard. They both laughed until their ribs hurt, remembering that time of adaptation, when each day brought a new adventure in domestic incompetence on Catherine's part and infinite patience on Samuel's. "You know what I love most about our life?" Catherine asked when they finally calmed down. "What?" "That we can laugh about all of this. That the disasters became stories, and the stories became the foundation of our family." Samuel studied her. In the moonlight, this extraordinary woman who had chosen to stay, when she could have left, who had chosen to love, when she could have chosen security. "Catherine Rose Crawford," he said with ceremonious solemnity, "if I had to write that advertisement." Again, knowing everything I know now, I would change only one thing. "What would you change?" Instead of seeking a respectable lady of good principles, I would have written, "Seeking Catherine Rose Ashworth, wherever she may be, because my heart already knows her, even though my mind doesn't know it yet." Catherine felt her heart fill so completely with love it could explode. She leaned to kiss him, a kiss that tasted of mint tea, shared years, and fulfilled promises. "I love you, Samuel Crawford," she whispered against his lips. "I love you for who you were when you met me, for who you've become with me, and for who we'll be together in all the years to come. And I love you, Catherine Crawford, for all the small and great miracles you've brought to our life." They remained like that, swaying gently under Colorado's infinite stars, knowing they had found something many search for their entire lives, without finding true love that grows in real earth, planted by hands, willing to work, watered by tears of both joy and difficulty, and bloomed under the sun of mutual dedication. But isn't this what true love has always been? Not perfection, but the daily choice to build something beautiful together. Dawn of the following day. The sun rose slowly over the mountains, painting the sky with brushstrokes of pink and gold. That reflected in the Crawford Ranch windows, like promises of a new day. Catherine woke gradually in Samuel's arms, as she had done every morning for the past 5 years, with the deep sensation of being exactly where she belonged. Tommy had slept through the night, a minor miracle Catherine didn't take for granted. And from the kitchen came the aroma of coffee and the sound of Mary preparing breakfast. The girl had developed considerable talent for cooking, quickly surpassing Catherine in the art of creating meals that didn't require acts of faith to be consumed. "Good morning, Mrs. Crawford," Samuel murmured, his voice hoarse from sleep, but his eyes already awake and full of tenderness. "Good morning, Mr. Crawford," Catherine replied, stretching like a satisfied cat. "Do you know what day it is today?" Samuel reflected for a moment. "The day I finally fixed the East Corral fence," Catherine laughed. "It's the 5-year anniversary of the day Gertrude destroyed my garden." "Ah," Samuel smiled. "The day I officially fell in love with you." "Officially?" "Well, I had been falling in love gradually, since the moment you threatened that cow with a broom. But that day when I saw you laugh at yourself after the disaster, when I understood you weren't going to give up no matter how many times things went wrong, that day, I knew you were the most extraordinary woman I would ever know." Catherine cuddled closer to him, breathing the familiar aroma of his skin that smelled of simple soap and honest work. "Do you know what I was thinking yesterday while watching you work with the horses?" "What?" "I was thinking about all the women who married for convenience, for social position, for financial security. And I realized I had found all that and more in a marriage that began as the least convenient union imaginable. Samuel looked at her with curiosity. What do you mean? I have convenience. I've never been more comfortable in my life than here, with you. I have social position. I'm respected in this town in a way I never experienced in London. I have financial security, not the wealth of my previous life, but the certainty we'll always have enough. And besides, I have something none of those other women have. What? Real love. Love that sees me wake up disheveled every morning and still looks at me as if I were beautiful. Love that knows me at my worst moments and loves me more, not less. Love we built together, instead of something that simply happened to us. Samuel kissed her gently, a kiss that tasted of fulfilled promises and shared future. How is it possible that each day I love you more than the previous one? Because each day I become more of who I really am, with you. And each day you do the same? They rose slowly, reluctant to break the morning's intimacy, but called by family and ranch responsibilities. While dressing, Catherine watched Samuel in the mirror as he shaved. His movements were precise and familiar, a domestic choreography she had come to love as much as any symphony. Samuel, she said suddenly, I want to write a letter. To whom? To my Uncle Edward, to thank him. Samuel stopped, the razor suspended halfway to his cheek. Thank him for offering me that opportunity to return to England, for putting me in a position where I had to consciously choose this life instead of simply falling into it. I had never thought of it that way. When I decided to stay after receiving his letter, it wasn't because I had no other choice. It was because I had the best choice, and I chose it. That makes everything we've built even more valuable. Samuel finished shaving and turned toward her, taking her hands. Catherine Crawford, you are the wisest woman I've known. I'm not wise, Catherine protested. I've just learned to recognize a miracle when I see it. They went down to the kitchen, where Mary had prepared a breakfast that would have impressed any London housekeeper: perfect eggs, crispy bacon biscuits that crumbled ideally, and jam made with strawberries from their own garden. Mary, Catherine said, hugging the girl who now reached almost to her shoulder, you are a blessing. I know, Mary replied with a mischievous smile. Papa tells me so every day. Tommy woke with his morning cry that sounded more like a cheerful greeting than a complaint. Catherine lifted him, marveling as always at the perfection of his small fingers, his eyes that each day looked more like Samuel's, the way he calmed instantly in her arms. Do you know what I'm going to teach this little one when he grows up? She asked Samuel. What? I'm going to teach him that true love isn't finding someone perfect, but finding someone imperfect with whom you can create something perfect. I'm going to teach him that home isn't where you were born, but where you choose to stay and grow. And I'm going to teach him that sometimes the best things in life begin with the most desperate decisions. Samuel looked at his family seated around the kitchen table, his wife feeding his son while planning the day with Mary, the morning sun, illuminating the scene with golden light, the aroma of homemade food filling the air. Do you know what I'm going to teach him? He said. What? I'm going to teach him that the greatest bravery is the bravery to love completely, knowing that love always implies the risk of loss. I'm going to teach him that honest work on honest land with honest people is the foundation of a good life, and I'm going to teach him that his mother is the most extraordinary woman who ever crossed an ocean for love. Catherine felt tears of happiness filling her eyes. And what are we going to teach him together? Mary, who had been listening with the particular intensity of adolescence, spoke before Samuel could answer. You're going to teach him that true love is what you two have, she said, with the serene wisdom of one who has grown up seeing the perfect example. You're going to teach him that home is where people laugh together, work together, and stay together, even when things get difficult. Samuel and Catherine looked at each other across the table, communicating in that silent language developed by couples who truly know each other. I think, Samuel said slowly, that Mary has already learned the most important lessons. I think you're right, Catherine agreed. That afternoon, while the sun set, painting the mountains purple and gold, Catherine sat at her desk to write the letter to her Uncle Edward. The words flowed easily, full of gratitude for the path she hadn't taken and joy for the one she had chosen. Dear Uncle Edward, I hope this letter finds you in good health. I wanted to write to thank you for your generous offer 5 years ago, and to explain why I chose to stay in Colorado. I have found here something I didn't know. I was looking for a life that is completely mine-built, with my own hands and my own heart. I have a husband who loves me for who I am, not for who I'm supposed to be. I have a daughter who teaches me something new every day, and a son who reminds me every morning of the miracle of new life. I don't have servants, but I have capable hands. I don't have elegant salons, but I have a home full of laughter. I don't have a noble title, but I have the earned respect of a community that values me for my character, not for my pedigree. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to consciously choose this life. By having the option to return, I could stay knowing it was exactly where I wanted to be. With love and gratitude, Catherine Rose Crawford. While sealing the letter, Catherine heard her family's voices in the yard, Samuel teaching Mary to repair a harness, Tommy babbling from his blanket under the tree, the sound of daily life she had come to love more than any symphony. She approached the window and observed the scene, engraving every detail in her memory. This moment, she thought, is perfect, not because nothing goes wrong, but because when things go wrong, we face them together. The Colorado wind carried with it the aroma of freshly cut hay wildflowers and the promise of needed rain. Catherine closed her eyes and breathed deeply, feeling gratitude from the tips of her toes to the crown of her head. She had crossed an ocean in search of security and had found adventure. She had sought a home and had found a family. She had expected survival and had found abundant life. And every night when she closed her eyes in the arms of the man who loved her completely, she knew with absolute certainty that every letter written, every risk taken, every moment of doubt overcome had been worth it for this, the daily miracle of true love on real land with real people. Because in the end, the best love stories aren't about finding your Prince Charming in a castle. They're about finding your person anywhere in the world and deciding together to build a castle there, brick by brick, day by day, with nothing but love, work, and the iron determination that what you found is worth every sacrifice necessary to protect it. And as the stars began to appear in Colorado's infinite sky, Catherine knew her story was just beginning.